The evening started like any other, with the city lights glowing softly through the windows and the hum of traffic below. The protagonist had just returned home from work, tired but feeling a strange flutter of excitement. An envelope lay on the kitchen table, elegant and thick, with the company's embossed logo on the front. Curious, they picked it up carefully, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Inside was an invitation to the CEO's annual party. The words were simple but carried a weight that made the heart beat faster. You are cordially invited to join our celebration. Your presence is requested. It was unexpected, and at first they wondered if it was a mistake. After all, they had only been at the company for a short while and were not among the top performers everyone always talked about. Sitting on the couch, the protagonist turned the invitation over and over, imagining what the party would be like. They had heard stories of these gatherings from colleagues. Lavish decorations, a sea of influential people, and a lot of hidden competition disguised as polite conversation. Just the thought of walking into that kind of environment made their stomach tighten. But beneath the nerves, there was also a spark of curiosity. This could be a chance to meet people who might change their career or even open doors they had never imagined. They decided to take a few deep breaths and calm their racing thoughts. They remembered their grandmother's words, always whispered when life felt overwhelming. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. Taking this to heart, they knew that the invitation was more than just a card. It was an opportunity to step outside their comfort zone, to be seen not just as another employee but as someone who had potential, someone who had talents that went beyond spreadsheets and reports. The next day, they started preparing. They looked at their wardrobe and realized they didn't have anything that felt just right for a high-profile party. Everything seemed either too plain or too flashy. In the end, they chose a simple but elegant outfit that made them feel confident without drawing unnecessary attention. It was a delicate balance, the kind they had always struggled with. Looking in the mirror, they adjusted their posture, straightened their shoulders, and reminded themselves that confidence was something they could wear just like clothes. Even with preparation, doubt crept in. What if people laughed at them? What if they couldn't make small talk with all those important people? The thought of walking into a room where everyone seemed to belong while they felt like an outsider made them hesitate. But then they remembered something else. The one thing that always made them feel at home, no matter the situation. The piano. The thought of music brought a quiet comfort, a reminder that talent and passion were stronger than fear. Even if they stumbled in conversation, their music was theirs, untouchable and real. When the day of the party arrived, the protagonist felt a mix of excitement and nerves that made it hard to focus on anything else. Every step they took toward the venue was a small victory. They parked the car a few blocks away, wanting to walk the last stretch and gather their thoughts. The streets were lively, filled with people rushing to dinners, meetings, and their own evening plans. It was easy to feel small, invisible, but they held their head high, reminding themselves that tonight was about taking a chance. As they approached the building, they could see the grandeur of the venue. Lights sparkled against the windows, and music faintly spilled out into the street, teasing them with what awaited inside. Valets were busy parking cars, and elegantly dressed guests were chatting and laughing, carrying drinks and smiling in a way that seemed effortlessly polished. The protagonist felt a pang of anxiety but took another deep breath and walked in. Inside, the atmosphere was even more impressive. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow across the room. The walls were decorated with tasteful artwork, and every detail seemed to whisper wealth and sophistication. Guests moved gracefully through the space, their laughter mingling with soft background music. It was overwhelming, but there was also a sense of excitement, a feeling that anything could happen tonight. They were greeted politely by a hostess who checked the invitation and guided them toward a quieter corner of the room. From there, the protagonist could observe without immediately being swept into the current of socializing. It was a strategic choice, giving themselves a moment to acclimate, to breathe, and to prepare for the interactions that were inevitable. They watched as groups formed and dissolved, as conversations flowed in rapid, elegant bursts. It was fascinating and a little intimidating. Despite the nerves, they made an effort to smile and nod when approached, to engage politely even when unsure what to say. A few guests asked polite questions about their work, and they answered carefully, finding small ways to inject a bit of personality without overstepping. It was exhausting, but each small success brought a little more confidence, a reminder that they could survive this world, one conversation at a time. As the evening progressed, they noticed some whispers and sideways glances. A few guests snickered when they walked past, and some comments seemed to carry a subtle ridicule. The protagonist felt the sting but tried to ignore it. They reminded themselves that not everyone understood them, that the people who judged were often the ones who had never had to step outside their comfort zones. Still, it was hard not to feel self-conscious, to feel the weight of being seen as different in a room full of people who seemed to belong effortlessly. Finding a small table near the back, the protagonist sat and sipped a drink, letting their gaze wander around the room. They watched people laughing, sharing stories, and moving with ease. The contrast between the effortless confidence of others and their own cautious steps was palpable. Yet, in that quiet moment, there was also a sense of determination. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to retreat. Their eyes drifted to a grand piano tucked into a corner of the room. It seemed almost like a secret, a sanctuary amidst the buzz of social interactions. The sight of it stirred something deep inside, a mixture of longing, nostalgia, and a quiet assurance. This piano had been a companion through lonely nights, a place where fears melted away and confidence blossomed. A thought formed, almost impulsive: what if they played? What if they let the music speak for them when words felt inadequate? The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Playing in front of strangers in a room full of important people was far from comfortable. But it also felt like an opportunity, a chance to be seen for something genuine, something that was undeniably theirs. The protagonist felt a spark of courage, the same spark that had carried them through so many uncertain moments in life. It was time to step forward, to see what could happen when talent met opportunity. They pushed back their chair and took a deep breath, steadying their hands and their mind. Every step toward the piano was a small act of bravery, a defiance of fear and ridicule. They didn't know how it would be received, but for the first time that evening, the anticipation wasn't paralyzing, it was energizing. They could feel their heart pounding in rhythm with the potential of the moment, each beat echoing the thought that tonight might be more than just another event. As they reached the piano, they brushed their fingers lightly over the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath their touch. The music began softly, almost hesitantly, but each note carried clarity and emotion. The room seemed to shift subtly, as if sensing the change. Guests nearby paused, their chatter softening as the sound drew attention. The protagonist closed their eyes for a moment, letting the music flow naturally, feeling a connection that transcended words and small talk. In that instant, the protagonist realized something profound. The party, the judgment, the whispers, it didn't matter. The piano had always been there, a constant source of confidence and expression. And now, in front of people who had no idea of the talent they possessed, it was time to let it shine. With each note, the nervousness melted a little more, replaced by the quiet joy of doing something authentic and beautiful. It was a beginning, a moment that promised more than just music. The protagonist felt a sense of purpose, an understanding that this night could change everything if they allowed themselves to step fully into the moment. And with that thought, they played on, letting the piano speak the words that their heart had been too cautious to say, unaware of the attention they were beginning to draw from the most unexpected of listeners. The moment they had started playing the piano, a small group of guests had gathered nearby, drawn by the unexpected music in the middle of the party. At first, the protagonist felt a surge of confidence as the familiar notes filled the room. There was a sense of comfort in the rhythm, a reassurance that no matter how intimidating the crowd, the music was theirs. It was like speaking in a language everyone could understand, and for a moment, the anxiety that had weighed on them since entering the party began to fade. But the feeling of safety didn't last long. From across the room, they noticed some guests whispering and glancing in their direction. Their laughter was barely contained, but the tone carried something sharper, a subtle but unmistakable hint of ridicule. The protagonist's heart sank slightly, the nerves creeping back in like unwelcome shadows. They tried to focus on the piano, letting their fingers move over the keys as naturally as possible, but the awareness of judgment made each note feel heavier. One of the guests, a man in an expensive suit with a perfectly groomed demeanor, stepped closer and made a quiet comment that was loud enough for the protagonist to hear. "Look at them trying to be fancy. Do they even belong here?" The words stung, but they chose not to respond. The protagonist reminded themselves that the music spoke louder than any mockery, and that confidence was not measured by how others treated them but by how they held themselves in the moment. Still, the ridicule continued in subtle forms. A few others exchanged glances, smirks, and light snickers as if testing boundaries. The protagonist could feel their cheeks heat up and their posture stiffen. The room suddenly felt larger, and every movement of those around them seemed exaggerated in comparison to their own cautious gestures. It was overwhelming, and the sense of being an outsider grew stronger with each passing minute. Despite this, the protagonist refused to stop playing. Each note was a small act of defiance, a statement that their presence was valid and their talent real. The music began to flow more naturally again, and with every chord, a little more of the fear melted away. They reminded themselves that talent could not be undermined by whispers or laughter, that music had the power to reach people even when words failed. A few guests began to lean in, genuinely curious. Their faces showed surprise and admiration, though it was mixed with the amusement of those who had been mocking. It was confusing and nerve-wracking to see the changing expressions. The protagonist realized that perception was fluid, that even in a room full of people ready to judge, there was space for recognition and respect. The key was persistence, the willingness to keep going despite the discomfort. In the midst of the playing, the protagonist remembered the advice of a former teacher who had always emphasized resilience. "Let your work, your skill, and your passion speak for you," they had said. Those words echoed in their mind, reinforcing the courage it took to continue. Each key pressed became a testament to their determination, a way to communicate that they belonged as much as anyone else in that grand room. The initial ridicule began to lose its sharp edge as more people stopped to listen. Some were clearly impressed, nodding subtly, while others whispered among themselves, reevaluating their assumptions. The protagonist could feel a shift in the energy, a quiet acknowledgement that perhaps they were not as insignificant as the mocking suggested. It was a small victory, but it mattered greatly in the emotional landscape of the evening. Yet not everyone's opinion was favorable. There were still a few guests who leaned back with raised eyebrows, exchanging subtle jokes that carried the sting of exclusivity. The protagonist had to remind themselves repeatedly not to internalize those comments, to focus on the music and the joy it brought rather than the opinions of those unwilling to appreciate it. This mental struggle added an invisible weight, making every note played a challenge of both skill and endurance. During a brief pause in the music, one of the more vocal critics approached, a glass of champagne in hand, and smiled in a condescending way. "Interesting choice," the guest said, voice smooth but carrying an edge. "I never expected someone like you to be able to do that." The protagonist's hands trembled slightly, but they maintained composure. They offered a polite smile and continued, letting the piano speak where words could not. Every chord was a quiet answer, a reminder that judgment could not define their abilities. More guests began to gather, curiosity overtaking their initial amusement. Some whispered quietly among themselves, others simply stopped to listen. The protagonist noticed a subtle change in the room. The music, once background, was becoming a focal point. The mocking eyes were gradually replaced by attentive gazes, a shift that was both exhilarating and grounding. It was a reminder that authenticity and skill could outshine ridicule when given the chance. The protagonist played with renewed energy, feeling the notes resonate with confidence. They began to experiment lightly, weaving in nuances and flourishes that demonstrated their mastery. The room responded almost imperceptibly at first, a shift in posture here, a slight nod there. Each small acknowledgement reinforced the decision to keep playing, to remain steadfast in the face of mockery. It was a personal victory, a moment of reclaiming control over a space that had initially felt hostile. Amid the music, a few more guests joined the circle, drawn by genuine curiosity rather than judgment. Their faces reflected surprise and admiration, and a few even whispered compliments to one another. The protagonist felt a sense of validation, not from external approval but from the realization that their talent had power beyond social barriers. The initial ridicule seemed increasingly irrelevant, a minor obstacle in a night that was slowly transforming into something remarkable. By now, the protagonist had stopped noticing the whispers entirely. The piano had become a shield, a medium through which they could express themselves fully. Every note reinforced their presence, asserting that they were more than just another guest to be quietly mocked. The room was still full of conversations and laughter, but there was a new rhythm, a subtle harmony that included the protagonist in a way it hadn't at the start of the evening. Even so, the emotional toll of the earlier ridicule lingered. They felt a mix of relief and lingering tension, aware that not everyone would ever appreciate their skill. But they had survived the scrutiny, maintained composure, and let their talent shine. The experience was both humbling and empowering, a reminder that true recognition often comes after moments of doubt and discomfort. The protagonist realized that resilience wasn't about being impervious to judgment. It was about continuing despite it. As the music carried on, the protagonist noticed something else. A few influential guests were watching more closely, their expressions thoughtful and attentive. These were individuals whose opinions mattered professionally and socially. The realization added another layer of purpose to their playing. It was not only a personal triumph but an opportunity to be seen in a new light, to demonstrate abilities that might otherwise have remained unnoticed in the shadows of a high-profile event. The evening stretched on, and with each passing moment, the initial ridicule faded further into the background. The protagonist's confidence grew with every chord, every carefully chosen note that resonated with the listeners. They began to understand that judgment, while painful, was temporary, whereas talent and authenticity had a lasting impact. This night, once fraught with anxiety, was transforming into a turning point, a moment that could redefine how they were seen by others and, more importantly, how they saw themselves. By the time a subtle shift in the room indicated a lull in conversations, the protagonist had fully immersed themselves in the music. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a voice, a declaration, and a sanctuary. The ridicule that had seemed so threatening at the start had been absorbed, transformed into a backdrop against which their talent shone even brighter. It was a moment of quiet triumph, the first in what promised to be a series of significant steps forward in both confidence and recognition. The protagonist finally paused, letting the final notes linger in the air. A hush fell briefly over the immediate area, a small but meaningful acknowledgement from the guests who had been listening. The atmosphere had shifted from amusement to respect. Curiosity now mingled with genuine appreciation. Though the night was far from over, and the party still buzzed with energy, this moment marked a subtle but powerful change. The protagonist had faced ridicule head-on and emerged not just unscathed but strengthened, ready to see where the evening would lead next. The piano notes continued to fill the room, more confident now, flowing effortlessly from the protagonist's fingers. The initial tension that had weighed on their shoulders earlier had begun to ease. Each chord was a little victory, a quiet reminder that talent could hold its ground even when faced with doubt and ridicule. The small crowd that had gathered had grown, their faces showing a mix of curiosity, intrigue, and quiet admiration. The protagonist felt a strange but welcome energy, a connection to the room that transcended conversation and social norms. It wasn't long before they noticed the subtle shift in body language of the guests who had mocked them earlier. The smirks faded into raised eyebrows, the laughter softened, and more serious expressions replaced the once dismissive glances. People were listening now, truly listening, as if realizing that they had underestimated the person at the piano. This recognition, although quiet and unspoken, was powerful. The protagonist felt a warm sense of validation that no words could give, and it strengthened their resolve to continue. Among the crowd, there was a group of influential guests who had been observing more closely. Their whispers were not mocking but thoughtful, a shared acknowledgement that something unexpected and remarkable was unfolding. The protagonist noticed a few guests subtly nodding in rhythm with the music, their expressions showing appreciation for the skill, dedication, and emotion conveyed through each note. The piano, once merely an instrument, had become a bridge connecting the protagonist to an audience that had initially doubted them. The protagonist's hands moved with growing confidence, fingers dancing across the keys as if guided by a combination of instinct and emotion. They added subtle embellishments to the melody, moments that reflected their creativity and personal style. Each variation captured attention, drawing more people toward the piano. The room seemed to quiet around them, a softening of chatter and clinking glasses as the music commanded the space. It was as if the protagonist had become the center of an invisible gravitational pull, where curiosity and admiration replaced ridicule. In the midst of playing, the protagonist noticed a particularly influential figure approaching, the CEO himself. The air seemed to shift slightly with his presence, a quiet intensity in his gaze. He paused near the piano, observing without interruption. The protagonist felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation, aware that their music had captured the attention of someone whose opinion could change everything. Yet, instead of pressure, the awareness brought a sense of purpose. This was their moment to be seen, to demonstrate what had been hidden beneath the quiet demeanor they had carried into the party. The CEO's presence seemed to embolden the protagonist further. The music became more expressive, filled with subtle dynamics that conveyed emotion and technical skill. It was not just a performance. It was a declaration of identity and capability. Guests around the piano were visibly impressed, some exchanging glances of surprise, others leaning closer to hear better. The atmosphere shifted from polite interest to genuine engagement, a recognition that something exceptional was taking place. As the piece continued, the protagonist felt an unusual mix of calm and excitement. The piano had always been a sanctuary, a space where fear could be transformed into expression, and now it was a platform that demanded attention and respect. They played with intention, each note deliberate, weaving emotion and technical mastery into the melody. The room responded subtly, an almost imperceptible change in energy that communicated acknowledgement and admiration without a single word spoken. Guests who had been skeptical or dismissive initially found themselves caught up in the experience. Whispers turned into quiet conversations about the talent being displayed. Nods of approval replaced smirks, and a few even quietly recorded short videos on their phones, unable to resist capturing the moment. The protagonist remained focused on the keys, aware of the growing attention but choosing to channel it into the music rather than letting it distract them. Every chord was a reinforcement of confidence, a declaration that skill and authenticity had power. The protagonist's confidence grew steadily as the music continued. They added small improvisations, delicate flourishes that highlighted creativity and emotional depth. It was a subtle show of mastery that drew appreciative glances from both friends and strangers, people who had initially doubted their presence at the party. The energy in the room shifted, a transformation from skepticism and mockery to curiosity, admiration, and quiet awe. The piano had become a vehicle for change, a way to communicate value and individuality beyond social impressions. Some guests approached and whispered compliments to one another, their tones filled with surprise and newfound respect. The protagonist noticed a few former critics watching more carefully, their expressions softening, a mixture of reconsideration and admiration. It was clear that perceptions were shifting, that the music was breaking down barriers that had seemed insurmountable when the evening began. The protagonist felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that patience, courage, and skill were quietly rewriting the narrative of the night. Midway through the performance, the CEO spoke to someone nearby in a low voice, his attention fully on the piano. The protagonist couldn't hear the words, but the focus and subtle nodding of others suggested that something significant was being acknowledged. This realization fueled their performance further, each chord resonating with a sense of purpose and potential. They were no longer just playing for themselves. They were playing for recognition, for opportunity, and for the transformation of a room that had initially seemed impenetrable. The crowd around the piano grew gradually, people drawn by the sound, the emotion, and the quiet command of the protagonist's presence. The whispers and mockery that had once felt so heavy were now replaced by hushed appreciation. The protagonist realized that talent had the power to alter perceptions, to open doors that ridicule and skepticism had tried to close. The piano was no longer a mere instrument. It was a voice, a medium through which confidence, creativity, and resilience were being broadcast silently but powerfully. The protagonist's playing became more expressive, incorporating subtle dynamics, gentle crescendos, and delicate pauses that showcased control and artistry. Guests were captivated, the attention now genuine and focused. Some leaned in, listening intently, their faces reflecting surprise, admiration, and quiet respect. The protagonist felt a deep sense of fulfillment, the kind that came from aligning passion with purpose, from sharing a skill that had been honed through years of dedication and quiet practice. As the piece approached its climax, the protagonist felt a sense of release and empowerment. The room had transformed around them, the energy shifting from doubt and judgment to engagement and admiration. The piano had become a bridge, a way to connect, communicate, and assert presence without a single word of explanation. The protagonist realized that courage and authenticity had led to this moment, and that the ridicule of the past had been a catalyst rather than an obstacle. In the final moments, the protagonist played with a mix of precision and emotion, each note resonating with confidence and grace. The music lingered in the air, leaving a subtle silence as it concluded. Guests around the piano absorbed the impact, their expressions reflecting a combination of awe and respect. The protagonist sat back, hands resting lightly on the keys, breathing steadily, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. The ridicule that had once threatened to overwhelm was now replaced by acknowledgement and opportunity, and the evening seemed full of promise. For the first time that night, the protagonist allowed themselves a small smile, a recognition of the journey from anxiety and doubt to attention and admiration. The piano had provided a voice where words had failed, a means to assert presence, and a way to transform perception. The room had shifted subtly but significantly, and the protagonist knew that this moment was just the beginning. The music had opened a door, one that could lead to new opportunities, connections, and recognition. It was a night that promised change, and the protagonist felt ready to see where it would lead. The room seemed to hold its breath as the final notes of the piano lingered in the air. Guests around the instrument were visibly affected, their expressions a mixture of surprise, admiration, and quiet respect. The protagonist rested their hands lightly on the keys, taking a steadying breath, feeling the energy of the room shift dramatically from the ridicule they had faced earlier to genuine attention. The piano had become their voice, their statement, and the results were undeniable. It was then that the CEO, who had been quietly observing from a few steps away, stepped closer. The air seemed to tighten slightly with his presence, an unspoken authority that drew the attention of nearby guests. He approached with measured steps, his eyes focused intently on the protagonist. The earlier whispers and speculations among the attendees seemed to pause as everyone sensed that something important was unfolding. The protagonist felt a flutter of nerves, aware that this was a pivotal moment. But alongside the nerves was a surge of determination, a desire to present their talent without hesitation. The CEO stopped near the piano, nodding slightly, as if acknowledging the effort and skill that had just been demonstrated. There was no judgment in his expression, only curiosity and interest. The protagonist felt a momentary wave of anxiety, wondering if they were about to be scrutinized in ways far more intense than the earlier ridicule. But the CEO's demeanor was calm, patient, and encouraging. It was as if he had recognized the courage it took to step into the spotlight and wanted to see more, to understand the full extent of what they could do. Without a word, the CEO gestured toward the keys and spoke in a measured voice that carried through the hushed crowd. Play something you love, something that reflects who you are. The request was simple, yet it carried tremendous weight. The protagonist felt their heart race, a mixture of excitement and nerves. It was an invitation to reveal their true talent in front of a room full of influential people, including the very person who could open doors that had seemed closed until now. Taking a deep breath, the protagonist adjusted their posture and placed their fingers lightly on the keys. They began to play, allowing the music to flow naturally, guided by memory and emotion. This time, there was no hesitation, no self-doubt lingering in the background. The music was a pure reflection of their skill, creativity, and the emotions that had been held quietly for so long. Each note resonated with confidence, subtly showcasing their technical ability and the depth of feeling behind the performance. The guests gathered around watched intently, captivated by the transformation unfolding before them. The piano, once a source of private comfort, had become a center of attention, commanding focus and respect. The protagonist played with precision and fluidity, their fingers dancing effortlessly over the keys. The melody was both intricate and emotive, a blend of technical mastery and heartfelt expression. The audience felt the power of authenticity, the beauty of skill married to passion. As the music continued, the CEO observed closely, nodding slightly, a smile playing on his lips. There was a quiet approval in his expression, an acknowledgement of both talent and courage. The protagonist felt a wave of calm wash over them, realizing that this was no longer about impressing strangers, but about sharing a part of themselves with those willing to listen. Every note was a step further away from the ridicule they had faced earlier and a step toward recognition, respect, and personal triumph. Guests around the piano began to whisper softly, exchanging remarks that reflected genuine surprise and admiration. The protagonist noticed a few of the earlier critics now standing silently, their expressions thoughtful and softened. The atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. What had begun as an environment of skepticism and subtle judgment had transformed into one of appreciation and engagement. The protagonist felt a deep sense of satisfaction, understanding that skill, authenticity, and courage had the power to alter perception and command attention. The CEO leaned slightly closer, his attention unwavering, and asked quietly, "Could you play the piece you feel represents you best?" The request carried both curiosity and expectation, and the protagonist felt a brief flicker of nerves. But the warmth in his tone, combined with the calm focus of his gaze, provided reassurance. This was not a test of perfection but an invitation to reveal authenticity and talent, a chance to show what made them unique. The protagonist nodded and began the new piece, their fingers moving with fluid confidence over the keys. The melody was more personal, reflecting years of practice, dedication, and emotional experience. The audience was drawn in, their attention captivated by the combination of technical skill and heartfelt expression. The music carried a quiet power, telling a story without words, bridging gaps that conversation could never fully span. It was a revelation for the listeners, a display of talent that could not be ignored. As the piece progressed, the room seemed to shrink around the piano. Guests leaned in slightly, their focus riveted on the performance. Even those who had initially been dismissive or mocking were caught in the spell of the music. There was a collective acknowledgement that the protagonist was not just talented but exceptional. Every chord, every subtle shift in dynamics, conveyed emotion and precision. The protagonist felt a growing sense of confidence, reinforced by the attentive presence of the CEO and the changing expressions of the crowd. When the piece concluded, a brief silence hung in the air, a moment of suspended attention that felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first and then growing steadily as more guests recognized the skill and emotional depth of the performance. The CEO was among the first to applaud, his approval clear and deliberate. The protagonist felt a mixture of relief, pride, and exhilaration, knowing that they had not only overcome the earlier ridicule, but had transformed the energy in the room entirely. The CEO approached, extending a hand and smiling. "You have remarkable talent," he said. "It's rare to see someone convey so much through their playing. Have you considered performing professionally, or sharing this skill more publicly?" The question was not only recognition but an opening to possibilities the protagonist had only dreamed of. The moment was surreal, a validation of years of quiet dedication and resilience. It was a turning point, a bridge between private passion and public acknowledgement. The protagonist smiled, feeling a mixture of gratitude and pride. They spoke modestly, explaining that music had always been a personal journey, but that the opportunity to share it in this setting was inspiring. The CEO nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed not only by the performance but by the humility and authenticity behind it. The surrounding guests had quieted, listening, absorbing the moment, and witnessing a transformation that had begun with quiet courage and talent. The applause continued, and the protagonist felt a shift in how they were perceived. Guests who had initially laughed or whispered were now approaching with smiles, compliments, and curiosity about their experience. The ridicule of the earlier part of the evening had been replaced by admiration and engagement. It was a powerful reminder that courage, skill, and authenticity could alter perception and create opportunity where doubt and mockery had once prevailed. The CEO lingered, continuing to show interest and curiosity. Conversations flowed, guests expressed surprise and respect, and the protagonist began to realize the significance of the evening. What had started as a moment of anxiety and uncertainty had evolved into recognition, validation, and new possibilities. The piano had served as a conduit, transforming personal talent into influence, perception, and connection. As the protagonist stepped away from the piano, there was a sense of quiet triumph. They had faced ridicule, navigated the challenges of judgment, and emerged not only unscathed but elevated in the eyes of those around them. The CEO's recognition was both personal and professional, opening doors to opportunities that had previously seemed unattainable. The evening was no longer simply a high-profile party. It was a pivotal moment of transformation, one that would resonate in both personal confidence and potential career growth. In the following moments, the protagonist felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had been true to themselves, allowed their talent to speak, and experienced the power of authenticity in a setting that could have been intimidating. The CEO's attention, the shift in the crowd's perception, and the acknowledgement of skill combined to create an experience that was both empowering and inspiring. It was a moment that would remain with them, a testament to the value of courage, perseverance, and the quiet power of passion revealed at the right time. The applause that followed the protagonist's final notes lingered in the room, filling it with an energy that felt both celebratory and transformative. Guests who had earlier doubted or mocked them now approached with curiosity and respect. Their smiles were genuine, their questions polite, and their interest in the protagonist's story sincere. It was a complete reversal from the whispers and sideways glances that had shadowed the earlier hours. The music had not only captivated but had reshaped perceptions, quietly demanding acknowledgement and admiration. As they stepped away from the piano, the protagonist felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Their fingers still tingled from the final chords, and their heart raced with the intensity of the experience. The fear and anxiety that had accompanied them at the start of the evening had been transformed into confidence and a sense of accomplishment. Every step they had taken toward the piano, every note they had played under scrutiny, had led to this moment of personal triumph. The CEO, still nearby, smiled warmly and extended a hand once more. "You have a remarkable gift," he said. "It's rare to encounter someone who combines skill, emotion, and courage so seamlessly. I would like to discuss opportunities for you to share this talent in more formal settings. Perhaps performances, collaborations, or mentorship. There are ways to elevate this in ways you might not have imagined." The words carried weight, offering not only recognition but the potential for tangible change in the protagonist's life and career. The protagonist felt a wave of gratitude and disbelief. Just hours ago, they had been the subject of ridicule, unsure if their presence mattered at all. Now, they were being acknowledged for something deeply personal and significant. The contrast was almost overwhelming, yet it reinforced a crucial lesson. Authenticity and dedication could transform perceptions and create opportunities where doubt had once prevailed. It was a reminder that true talent, when combined with courage, had the power to shift dynamics in even the most intimidating environments. Guests continued to approach, offering compliments, sharing curiosity about the music, and expressing genuine admiration. The earlier critics, now silenced by the undeniable display of talent, joined the conversations with a newfound respect. The protagonist navigated these interactions with a mix of humility and pride, aware that each encounter was a testament to the transformative power of performance and the courage to remain authentic in the face of judgment. Throughout the evening, the protagonist reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. They remembered the initial fear of attending the party, the anxiety over how they would be perceived, and the sting of ridicule that had accompanied early interactions. Every step had been a choice to persevere, to embrace vulnerability, and to let talent speak louder than doubt. The piano had been both a sanctuary and a platform, a means to communicate where words alone could not suffice. As the night progressed, the protagonist began to see the broader impact of their performance. Conversations around the room shifted, and groups who had previously been insular now engaged in discussions about the music, creativity, and the courage required to perform in such a setting. The atmosphere was subtly but unmistakably altered, a testament to the ripple effect of authenticity and talent. The protagonist realized that what had started as a personal triumph was influencing the environment around them, fostering acknowledgement, respect, and genuine connection. The CEO returned later in the evening, accompanied by a few senior colleagues and guests of influence. He invited the protagonist to join them at a more private table, signaling an interest in further discussion about opportunities, mentorship, and potential collaborations. The protagonist felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, understanding the significance of the moment. This was more than recognition. It was an invitation to step into a new realm of professional and personal growth. At the table, the conversation flowed naturally, focusing on music, performance, and the skills required to captivate an audience. The CEO asked insightful questions, listened attentively, and offered suggestions for development and exposure. The protagonist responded thoughtfully, sharing experiences, inspirations, and aspirations. The dialogue was empowering, highlighting not only the technical proficiency of the protagonist, but also their emotional intelligence, resilience, and ability to communicate effectively under pressure. Guests who had initially been dismissive now engaged respectfully, offering perspectives, insights, and even praise. It was a remarkable transformation, a shift from skepticism and ridicule to acknowledgement and collaboration. The protagonist felt the weight of the evening's journey, recognizing that every moment of courage, every note played under scrutiny, had contributed to this outcome. It was a clear illustration of how perseverance, authenticity, and skill could redefine social dynamics and open doors previously thought inaccessible. Throughout the conversation, the protagonist remained grounded, aware that this recognition was both an honor and a responsibility. The opportunity to share talent more broadly, to influence others positively, and to contribute meaningfully to the creative and professional community was exhilarating. It was a reminder that success was not simply about being seen, but about using visibility to make an impact, inspire others, and continue developing one's abilities. The night continued with an air of celebration, the protagonist navigating interactions with a newfound confidence. Guests approached with curiosity, offering thoughtful questions, expressing admiration, and engaging in conversations that were previously unimaginable. The atmosphere was transformed, a testament to the power of courage, authenticity, and skill. The protagonist understood that the evening had not only changed how others perceived them but also how they perceived themselves. Reflecting on the journey, the protagonist realized that the transformation was not immediate. It had been gradual, requiring patience, persistence, and faith in one's abilities. The ridicule at the start had been a catalyst, highlighting the contrast between fear and courage, doubt and action. By remaining true to themselves and allowing their talent to shine, the protagonist had turned an intimidating and potentially humiliating experience into a defining moment of empowerment and recognition. As the party drew to a close, the protagonist took a moment to absorb the experience fully. The initial anxiety, the whispers of mockery, and the tension of stepping into a room of influential figures were all part of a journey that had culminated in validation, opportunity, and personal growth. The piano, a constant companion and source of confidence, had served as both shield and voice, transforming vulnerability into strength, uncertainty into presence. Before leaving, the CEO approached once more, offering a warm smile and words of encouragement. Remember, talent like yours deserves to be shared. Keep honing it, and opportunities will continue to grow. The protagonist nodded, grateful and inspired, understanding that this was not the end of a moment, but the beginning of a path filled with potential, challenge, and continued growth. It was an affirmation that perseverance, Authenticity and courage could turn ridicule into respect, fear into opportunity, and talent into recognition. Walking out of the party, the protagonist felt lighter, empowered, and ready to embrace the possibilities ahead. The night had transformed not only how they were seen by others but also how they viewed themselves. Confidence, skill, and authenticity had become their allies, proving that even in the face of doubt and judgment, perseverance could create moments of profound impact. The experience was a testament to the quiet strength found in resilience, the enduring power of talent, and the transformative effect of courage combined with authenticity.